Navigating Solo is the official singles adult ministry podcast of the United Pentecostal Church International. Navigating Solo is dedicated to encouraging single adults in every stage of life by using biblical principles to navigate discussion on various topics. Here's your host, Dr. Lorraine Orozco.
Welcome to Navigating Solo. Today we have another one of our special guests with us, Pastor Loammi Diaz, who is going to be sharing his testimony and just be sharing some of his experiences in ministry as a single pastor and a single father. So, Brother Loammi, thank you so much for agreeing to come on to Navigating Solo. We appreciate you sharing with us. I know you're part of the single adult ministry team and doing some amazing things in California. So welcome to Navigating Solo.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is great to be here. And I've listened to several of your episodes there, and you are doing an incredible job. So I'm very thankful to be here, and it's an honor for me.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you with us. So I wanted to start off with those of you who do not know Loammi Diaz. Let's just dive in and just tell us about where you're from, your family, any ministry, all of the things that you do.
Sure. So I'm actually originally from the Dominican Republic. So my first language is Spanish. I actually pastor a predominantly Spanish church. I was raised in New York City, and I've lived in California. I've lived in Hawaii. I've lived in Phoenix, Arizona. I have lived in Houston. I've lived in Indianapolis. So I get around. And now I am pastoring a church in Moreno Valley, California. I am a single dad. And yeah, that's pretty much my life in a nutshell.
Well, I think I mentioned before to you that I love the fact that you pastor right now in Southern California. And of course, that's always like the dream, the living in California and the great, wonderful weather. So how long have you been pastoring in Southern California?
15 months now. And I always said that because of the weather and the culture and the food and all that, all of my life, I've always said, like, man, I would give an arm and a leg to live in Southern California. And now I'm here, and I am giving an arm and a leg and a leg and more, because prices are crazy out here, crazy. But it's been great so far.
So I wanted to talk about your two sons, and I wanted to, how long have you been single, first of all? And then what has that experience been like for you raising your two sons?
Yeah, so I've been single about 11 years now, ever since 2012, May of 2012. And at first it was crazy challenging, and I was faced with the reality of single parenthood. And, nothing can prepare you for that. You don't take classes at Bible school that prepare you to be a single father. And it's interesting to me that how your question is about me being single, but right away I answer it as single father, because, and these are two distinct terms with different emphases, right? For me, my identity is wrapped up in being a father and not just in not having a wife. So I don't just say I'm single, I say I'm a single father. And that's funny, because I feel like many people associate being single with something lacking. But I immediately think of it as a blessing and a privilege that God has given me of being a single dad. And raising my two sons has been both a privilege and responsibility that has been great. It has deepened my faith, because I found myself solely responsible for teaching my children my faith in word and deed, and for passing the knowledge of God's works to the next generation, as the psalmist says. So it's been a great benefit to me in that it has deepened my own faith.
Mhm.
But also, it has taught me the true meaning of agape love, just sacrificial love. It is a love that gives without expecting anything in return. And I feel that's what that has given me. And lastly, I think, um, uh, and this is probably not something that many people think of when they think of being a single dad or a single mom, but I thank God for it because it's allowed me the opportunity to be a single influencer, at least in my circumstance where the mother is not present or around. It's allowed me to be the primary influencer in my children's lives, especially during times when their mom unfortunately struggled with some challenges that prevented her from being the exemplary parent that we had hoped for. So in essence, what might have appeared as a lack in our family dynamic turned out to be a blessing,
Mhm.
and a blessing in disguise, because you never go into being single after being married as you never look at it as being such a blessing, but it was a blessing in disguise because my children had a spiritual guide and a
Mhm.
spiritual influencer and a soul influencer,
Right.
uh, as their parent.
So I wanted to talk about Micah and Caleb because I was privileged to meet your family when you lived in Phoenix. And
Yes.
so I got to see Micah and Caleb when they were really little. And I just remember just seeing Caleb and both of them just being such worshipers
Mm.
and you coming in preaching for us. And so let's talk about Mike. I know one of them, so Caleb, he is where now? What is he doing?
He's at first year of Bible school at CLC,
Mhm.
which is my alma mater too. And he's been preaching. He's doing great. And my youngest son, Micah, still with me, and he has been, um, what is he? He's doing great in videography now, and God is using him greatly. I'm gonna tell you, like last week was our general conference, and at general conference, one of the greatest moments for me personally was Brother Laird Silliman coming over to me. He's at CLC,
Mhm.
and he goes, "I want to tell you, your son is at 5 a.m. prayer every morning." And that absolutely rocked my world in a positive way. So I'm pumped. I am so happy, joyful, proud. There's no greater joy than to know that my children walk in truth. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's my boys.
Well, that is wonderful, and what an encouraging thing to be able to hear, knowing that, like you said, you poured into them as a single father and were the sole person that was responsible for their spiritual, guidance and taking care of them in all the transitions that were in your life. And yet, God has just rewarded that, and He's moving, and the wonderful things that He is doing in the next generation. So I wanted to ask you, what is the best advice that you could give to someone who's raising their kids alone in church and you have walked that walk? And so what would you say to somebody who's in the beginning of that journey or starting that out or in the middle of it and kind of having some struggles? And what would you want to pass on to them?
Um, I I would say that I would have to pass on to them what I personally had to learn firsthand, and that is you need to lean on your church community. I always answer this question this way because I feel like this is extremely important. You need to lean on your church community. Don't hesitate to ask for help. Don't hesitate to ask for support. And I'll say this: pride will often get in the way of asking for help, and single people are some of the most prideful people. I have talked, for example, you see a woman who was abused, mistreated, belittled, and cheated on. And then when there's a separation, you ask them, well, what are you going to do? And the first thing they say without fail, almost everyone, the first thing they say is, I'm not filing for child support. I don't need his money. I don't want that. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, what? Are we being serious now? Um, it's not even about that. It's about your children. Like it's the welfare of your children. But the pride gets in our way because we want people to think that we're good. We want people to think that we could handle things on our own. And that's baloney.
Mhm.
Um, sometimes we need a day off. Sometimes we need a weekend. Sometimes we need moral, spiritual, emotional support. Sometimes we just need a hug, and sometimes we need someone to show up. And if you do, show up with groceries from time to time.
Mhm.
And sometimes we need motivation, and we need friends, and we need family, and that's not just for divorced people or for widows or widowers. I mean, never married even.
Yeah.
We all, as single people, we all need support, and so surround yourself with that. And if I'm talking directly to single parents, then what I would say is surround yourself and surround your children
Mhm.
with strong, godly role models within the church who can offer guidance, who can offer mentorship. Um, Something that I did quite a bit, I brought my children around happy and stable families.
Mhm.
I let them know by bringing them around exemplary families that, though you're also a happy family, it's not that we're a sad family, obviously, but I'm a happy family. But God's design is to have a nuclear family where both mom and dad are living for him and raising their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And this is what God's ideal is. And this is possible. And this is still my ideal because it is the biblical ideal.
Mhm.
And so surround yourself with that. I'm always reminded of the words of Jesus, and I'm just going to paraphrase, but he said something like, no one who has left house or mother, or father, or brother, or sister, or wife, and so forth, um, uh, for my sake, and then something like, we'll receive it here in this life. This, I think Mark says, in this life, um, 100-fold more. And I think at the very least, he's talking about the spiritual family that one comes into
Mhm.
as you enter the kingdom. I mean, I would imagine there's more to that, but at the very least, partly Jesus is saying, hey, there is a spiritual family, and if you've lost these things for my sake, um, you're going to gain parents and wives and households, and in my case, pools and a hot meal, and a place where I could spend Thanksgiving in. People talk about church hurt, church hurt. The church hurt me. Let me tell you something. Had it not been for the church, I'm here to talk about church help, because had it not been for the church, that's where I found my grandmas and fathers and mothers and people to support me. And especially my situation where I found myself when all of this went down, 2,500 miles from home.
Mhm.
And I needed that. I needed that desperately. And I found it in the church. And so that's my best advice. Take your children, find your comfort around the church family. That is your God-given spiritual family,
Mhm.
and lean on them, and don't be prideful, and bring your children around the church family and let the church help you heal. Be humble enough to understand that sometimes you do need help.
Yes.
And
And
that
that is wonderful advice. That's wonderful advice because I absolutely agree. We need each other. We need the body of Christ needs to come in. And I've personally seen you when I lived in Indiana. I know that, in Indiana, that was the case as well, that your kids were always around, families and pastors' families that
absolutely.
were there. And that was a beautiful thing to see it being embraced by those. those healthy nuclear families. So I wanted to transition and go into, now that we've talked about you raising your two sons, I wanted to say, as a pastor of a church, what has been some of the challenges as a single ministry leader? And I do know that this is being in California. You came in there as a single pastor.
Yeah.
So this wasn't like you came in there and then you became single. From the very get-go, you were the pastor at the church in California. So I just wanted to just kind of briefly talk about some of the challenges that you have faced in this season.
I would. There's several that I can talk about. Even now, like I'm dealing with a situation in the marriage there and counseling, and so there are some challenges as a single pastor, because normally when you are married and a woman wants to talk to you, you bring your spouse into the room and etc. But as a single man, those kind of things can be challenging, and you open yourself up to just nothing positive can come out of that. So there are some challenges in that regard, but I want to probably emphasize the one for me that I feel is most challenging, and that is standing before my congregation and addressing topics like marriage and healthy families, while carrying the knowledge that my own marriage did not succeed. And I don't know if it's my insecurity or the devil, but sometimes you're preaching on marriage and there's this little voice, if I can be honest and transparent, there's this little voice in the back of your head that's going, yeah, yours failed. So you're not equipped. You're not ready for this. So there's a certain level of insecurity that can creep in when counseling and when teaching on these subjects. And the way I've dealt with it, it's by openly discussing with my church the benefits of having a single pastor, and especially of having a single pastor like me. There are indeed benefits. Firstly, I have a heightened urgency to see the members of my church thrive in their marriages and in their families because of what I've experienced. I've seen it firsthand. I know what pain feels like. And so that drives me to focus my attention on providing guidance to them and support. And my own experiences have made me more determined to equip my people. So that's why I'm planning retreats and counseling opportunities with professionals and certain family services and et cetera, because I have an urgency to see the families in my church succeed so that they don't go through what I went through. And the last thing I'll say about this too is that I found that although there are some challenges that you go through as a single minister, these challenges have enriched my ability to serve and to lead my church with a greater empathy, with greater understanding, and with a greater determination to see our families flourish. So empathy is a big one. I come from it from a perspective of one who has experienced it. So I'm able to empathize with our people.
Well, I think that's wonderful that you mentioned that, because it's true, like you said, because of where I have been, I don't want them to go through what I have been through. So I'm creating an atmosphere that does its best to make sure that we meet those challenges and do everything we can to try to not, allow them to go through some of the things that you have gone through personally, if possible. So I wanted to kind of go in and transition into another question about what has been some of the positive aspects. And you kind of just said, being a single pastor, there are some benefits to that maybe people don't consider. But what has been some of the positive aspects of just being single that many people do not often consider?
That question is, everyone asks me that question, and I am the perfect person to ask that question to because I absolutely love being single. If the Lord, decides that my station in life shall change, I'm willing and I'm okay with that. But if not, like I absolutely enjoy, I love it. Where I go first is First Corinthians 7, where the Apostle Paul notes that those who are married often have a divided attention. They are troubled by many things. And I've been married. I know what that is. Marriage is a full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
There's care, there's things that you needed to care for. There's it's two people trying to become one flesh,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to work at that. It's a good marriage doesn't just happen. It takes a lot of work, a lot of focus. So, as a single individual, I've had the privilege of dedicating more time and energy to ministry, to a relationship with God, to serving Him, to my boys. That so these are things that have truly been a great benefit to me. Um, and there's another thing that I think for me that has worked, and that's flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
It
Right.
gives me a ton of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for example, last night we had a fellowship with my small group leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and I found myself in the back just doing fellowship with the young people, and they're looking at me and they're going, at one of the guys, they said, I don't think I've ever had a pastor like you. Like, he was like, you're like one of us, you know? And it's because I'm single, I feel like I can be one of them. But
Mm-hmm.
then just as smoothly, I went over and talked to my, third age leaders
Mm-hmm.
and felt right at home with them. I can go on mission trips. I can engage in other situations. There's flexibility. And I feel like that's a huge advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One thing that I will say, and the last thing that I will say about this too, is that for those who are single, who desire marriage in the future,
Mm-hmm.
being single as an adult can be seen as a season of intentional preparation for marriage.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
because people who married early, like at a young age, you didn't really think to get prepared for marriage.
No.
You were just living life.
Mm-hmm.
But now, if you're an adult single and you have this time, this is a time and a season of intentional preparation. It,
Absolutely.
it offers you the opportunities to develop essential qualities and skills that are needed for healthy and fulfilling marriages. I often find myself reading books on marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But this time, I'm not reading them from a perspective of how to fix my marriage or what can I do to fix. No, I have the time to actually dissect it, and I'm not pressed to, oh my goodness, there's no stress in me to try to get these things right. I have the time to actually dissect the book, to look over some of the principles, to make sure that I'm already living this in my life now, so that when I enter into a marriage, if I do, that I will be ready. So I think it's a great time to be a single adult is a great benefit because it gives you the opportunity to intentionally prepare for marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really great that you mentioned that. Something that people don't really consider is this time as being single. If you have that time, then you are making sure that you are the person that God wants you to be, and that you can be for that person that you marry. I think so many times we emphasize on the person that we want them to be for us, but not as
Mhm.
much in investing in who we want to be or we need to be in a relationship. So I'm thankful that you mentioned that. So kind of going into kind of closing, I wanted to talk about what your advice or encouragement would be. Would you like to give anyone who is struggling with being single? And I kind of know that you've already mentioned some things, but what kind of just encouragement would you like to say to our audience who is listening to Navigating Solo, that is single right now and maybe just not in the happiest place about it, or just became single, a certain situation that, it has not been within their control?
Um, I hope this is not I hope this is not a bad expression, but it, I would say take life by the horns.
Mhm.
Take life by the horns and just embrace this unique season of your life. It is a gift that God has given you. And so rather than viewing singleness as a limitation, see it as an opportunity for growth, for adventure, for all of these things. Don't waste a moment. Say yes to new experiences, travel to new places, embark in exciting adventures. Consider going back to school,
Mhm.
uh, learn new perspectives, a new language, perhaps, or two. Hone your skills in a particular area of interest. Become a photographer. Do hard things. Like, just
Mhm.
to me, this has been such a great journey. I've learned so many skills that I would have never, ever learned as a married man. I have encountered adventures I would have never had as a single person. And I have engaged in in vacations by myself, like flying solo, um, where it leaves me wondering, goodness, when am I going to have the next one? Because this was so amazing. This was so awesome. So I don't know. You've got to take life by the horns and just go for it. Um, and the last thing I'll say about this is you've got to set both long-term goals and short-term objectives to help you reach those goals, and be willing to give yourself up for the sake of reaching those goals. Challenge yourself to do hard things.
Mhm.
Empty yourself for the sake of the kingdom and for the sake of others. But set those goals, live for a purpose. Because when you don't, the what how does that saying goes? The An idle mind is the devil's playground.
Yeah.
My mom would always tell me that, and I thought it was a proverb. I could have sworn it was in the Bible for a long time until I read the Bible and never found it. But yeah, an idle mind is the devil's playground. So set goals in your life, set objectives, do stuff. Live for a life that goes beyond you. Live to leave a legacy
Mhm.
beyond your lifetime. And when you, I always tell people, before God gave Adam a partner, he gave him a purpose.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yes.
and so if this whole um the moral command of the garden was given to Adam before Eve came along.
Right.
The command um to to dominate uh, the rest of the garden came to Adam before Eve came along. Adam was complete before Eve got there.
Mhm.
So complete in his purpose, that is. So I would say, hey, find yourself a purpose before you find yourself a partner. And
Mhm.
in doing that, you will find joy in life. Because both marriage and singleness for Christians ought to point to the same thing, and that is glorifying God. So
Right.
glorify God in your singleness and be the best that you can be given the circumstances.
Yes, those are all wonderful things, wonderful advice to give to singles. And I just love what you said. Do hard things.
Hmm.
Can challenge our singles, if anything, do hard things and don't be afraid to do hard things. And the other thing that you mentioned is that, God gave Adam a purpose before he gave him a mate, and finding your purpose. So there's a really great words of encouragement to all of our singles who are listening today to Navigating Solo. So, Brother Loammi Diaz, I'm so thankful that you were able to spend time with us today. And you are one of the people that is working with single adult ministry with our wonderful community. So this is something that you do. You are involved in singles ministry in many different aspects. And so I am appreciative of all the wisdom and all the things that you have shared to us. Is there any last thing that you just wanted to say that you haven't mentioned any of our other questions before we sign out today?
Yeah, sure. I would say that in the quiet moments of singleness, when the world may seem to rush by in couples and commitments and so forth, I just want to say to my fellow single people, remember that you are not incomplete. Mm-hmm. You are not an individual with solely with deficiencies because you are single. No, you are someone with a story that is uniquely your own, and that it has been ordered by God. Mm-hmm. And when we complain, it makes us the judge of God's sovereignty. Mm-hmm. Basically, it tells God that he didn't know what he was doing when he ordered our steps. That's what we're doing when we complain. So, singleness isn't just a pause button on life. It's a chapter that is filled with the potential for purpose and laughter and unexpected adventures. And sometimes it's not a chapter. Sometimes it's the whole book. And that's all right too. Then write a masterpiece, write a bestseller. And the very last thing I'll say is that your singleness is not a waiting room, but it's a canvas. Mm-hmm. Not a waiting room, but it's a canvas waiting for your brush strokes of great creativity to create a masterpiece that is uniquely yours. And of course, God is directing your hand as you paint on that canvas, but see it as that. It's an open canvas. Paint a great masterpiece and live your life to the fullest.
That's beautifully said. Beautifully said. Well, Reverend Loammi Diaz, thank you again for being part of Navigating Solo and sitting down and taking the time to do this interview. We appreciate you and all that you do. And to all of our listeners on Navigating Solo, God bless. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye now.
Join us next week for another great interview on Navigating Solo.